The tunnel. The tunnel slide at the abandoned playground had always been a source of fascination and fear. It wasn't just old, it felt alive. Its once bright yellow paint had faded to a sickly mottled brown, and the entrance seemed to gape like a mouth waiting to devour anyone foolish enough to enter. Local legends surrounded the tunnel, stories of missing kids, ghostly voices, and a presence that could never quite be explained. Danny had heard it all. He wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories, though. At 12, he prided himself on being fearless, the kind of kid who would ride the fastest roller coaster or explore the darkest basements. So when his friends dared him to crawl through the tunnel at dusk, he didn't hesitate. The evening was warm, but as the sun dipped lower, the air around the playground seemed to cool unnaturally. Danny's friends gathered at the base of the slide, their faces pale with a mix of fear and anticipation. "Just go in and come out the other side," one of them said. "It's no big deal." Danny smirked. "You guys are such babies, it's just a stupid slide." He crouched at the entrance. The tunnel seemed darker than it should have been, but he ignored the prickling sensation at the back of his neck. Crawling inside, he expected the usual smell of damp plastic and dirt. Instead, the air grew thick, like the scent of rotting wood and something faintly metallic like blood. Halfway through, Danny paused. The light from the entrance was gone, and the exit seemed farther away than it had looked before. His breathing echoed unnaturally loud, and the tunnel felt tighter, as if the walls were closing in. Then he heard it, a faint whisper so soft he wasn't sure if it was real. "Danny!" He froze. "Very funny, guys!" he shouted, his voice trembling. "Danny?" The whisper came again, closer this time, almost right by his ear. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He scrambled forward, his knees scraping against the rough surface of the slide. The whispers multiplied, overlapping in a cacophony of voices, some laughing, some crying, some screaming. "Stay with us." He felt something cold brush against his ankle. Panicking, he kicked wildly, but there was nothing there. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit growing farther away with every frantic crawl. Then, he saw it. A figure appeared ahead of him, illuminated by a faint, sickly glow. It was a child, or at least it looked like one. Its face was pale and hollow, its eyes two black voids that seemed to suck in the dim light. The corners of its mouth stretched unnaturally wide into a jagged smile. "Stay and play," it whispered, its voice a chilling blend of a child's giggle and a guttural growl. Danny screamed, turning to crawl back the way he came, but the tunnel had changed. The walls were no longer smooth plastic. They were rough and pulsing, like living flesh. The whispers grew louder, echoing in his ears, making his head throb. "No, no, no!" he shouted, tears streaming down his face. The figure moved closer, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it crawled toward him. Danny felt the air grow colder, the weight of the darkness pressing down on him. Outside, his friends waited anxiously. They could hear Danny's muffled screams, but when they peered into the tunnel, all they saw was blackness. "Danny, come out!" one of them shouted. But there was no response. Suddenly, the tunnel shuddered. A low, guttural groan emanated from it, and the air around the playground grew still. The friends backed away, terrified. Moments later, the slide was silent. They waited for hours, but Danny never came out. The next morning, the tunnel slide looked as it always had, worn, empty, and unremarkable. The police found no trace of Danny, and his disappearance became just another part of the legend. Years later, kids still tell the story of Danny. Some claim they've seen his face in the tunnel, his eyes wide with terror. Others say if you crawl inside at dusk, you'll hear him crying, begging for help, trapped in the slide forever. And every so often, when the wind is still, the playground echoes with faint whispers. Stay and play, stay and play. The silent swings. On the outskirts of town, near an ancient forest, stood a forgotten playground. The equipment was coated in rust, the sandbox overgrown with weeds, and the swings, oh, the swings, were known to move even when there wasn't a hint of wind. Locals whispered that the playground was cursed, its history tied to something sinister, though no one could agree on the details. One evening, as the sky turned crimson, Emma and her friends decided to challenge the legend. The swings stood at the far end, their chains creaking softly. Daring each other, Emma boldly sat on the middle swing, the one rumored to be haunted. The moment she gripped the cold chains, the world seemed to change. The laughter of her friends faded, replaced by a low hum, like a far-off wail. The swing began to sway, gently at first, then with increasing force. Emma clutched the chains, her knuckles white. "Guys, stop messing around!" she shouted, but her friends were frozen, wide-eyed. Behind her, shadows writhed unnaturally, twisting into shapes that resembled human figures. One leaned close to Emma's ear and whispered something, though none of her friends could hear it. Emma's face turned pale. "No, I don't want to go," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. The swing jerked violently, flinging her into the air. The shadows swallowed her mid-scream, and the swing stopped, hanging lifelessly. Her friends bolted, terrified, and brought adults back to the playground. But Emma was gone. All they found was her shoe beneath the swing and a handprint scorched into the seat. The police searched for weeks, but no trace of Emma was ever found. To this day, the swing still moves on its own. Some claim that if you listen closely, you can hear Emma's terrified cries in the wind, pleading for someone to save her. The shadow tag. The game started like any other summer evening. A group of kids met at the playground to play tag, their laughter ringing through the air. But that night, as the sun set, something changed. It began when they noticed a boy standing near the sandbox. He wasn't part of their group. He was pale, thin, and dressed in old, tattered clothes that looked like they belonged in another era. His eyes were sunken, his face emotionless. "Want to play?" one of the kids asked hesitantly. The boy didn't speak, just nodded with a slow, unsettling smile. At first, everything seemed normal, but then the boy began moving impossibly fast, appearing behind the others without a sound. When he tagged someone, they screamed, claiming his touch was like ice. As the game went on, the shadows around the playground stretched unnaturally long, creeping toward the children like living things. The boy's laugh echoed through the air, a deep, guttural sound that didn't belong to a child. "Run," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The children scattered, but no matter how far they ran, the boy was always there, his shadow merging with theirs. One by one, the kids began to disappear. The last child standing froze in terror as the boy's shadow consumed him. "You're it now," the boy whispered before vanishing into the darkness. The next morning, parents found the playground empty. The equipment was coated in dust, as though untouched for years. On the slide, scratched into the surface, was a message. "Wanna play?" The parents called the police, but no trace of the children was ever found. To this day, the playground remains abandoned. But sometimes at sunset, people claim to hear faint laughter and see shadows playing tag in the fading light. If you want to listen more chilling and scary stories like these, please like, share, and subscribe for more.